Welcome to Ask the Educator, a podcast brought to you by Healthmark Industries. Are you a sterile processing technician or manager? Maybe you work in infection prevention or biomedical engineering. Whether you're a frontline tech, endoscopy tech, OR nurse, or surgical services administrator, you undoubtedly have influence in medical device processing at your facility. In each episode, we speak with experts from the Healthmark Clinical Affairs team, industry leaders, or special guests from the trenches to answer your questions and bring you relevant industry information, equipping you for excellence in medical device processing. My name is Kevin Anderson, and I will be your host. Now let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Ask the Educator podcast. This is Kevin Anderson, your host. Joining me again is Adam Okada and Stephen Kovach. We're basically going to pick up where we left off with Tony Monaco, Nancy Chobin, and Don Gordon. We were having this conversation about certification and how it's been, 5 states now that have required it. And Tony and Nancy kind of spearheaded the very first one in New Jersey. Don was instrumental in the one in New York. And basically, we kind of got that conversation started. Each state kind of had their challenges and the different ways that they were doing that. We started talking about career ladders and the hospitals themselves kind of starting to require certification as part of, bridging that gap. It's been 20 years. Only 5 states require certification. So what's been happening? Well, the hospitals have been stepping in and a lot of them are now requiring certification. That's where we left off. If you guys missed any of that first discussion, I recommend you go back and check out that podcast where we started. With that, though, I will pass it over to Steve and we can pick up this conversation where we left off.
Yeah, it's very interesting on this career ladder. And we talked about cooperation and talking to each other and where you're at. And Nancy and Don and both Tony have some really unique stories. And I would hope Nancy could share how she reached out and worked with her first career ladder and formed a cooperation and a partnership with her union that was there. Nancy, could you share some of that with us?
Yes. I wanted, when I first started at my hospital, we needed to rebuild, which is usually the case. And we needed a lot of education. This was before certification. But I wanted to train people and then retain them because we were losing people to surgery centers. Were starting to open up all over the place. And people, would go there because they didn't have to work weekends. They didn't have to rotate. And so we wanted to keep people in the department, especially if we were going to train them. So we developed the career ladder. I went to HR and they said, this is never going to fly with the union. And I said, well, let's meet with them. And they thought I was crazy. And I said, well, they have to understand what we do. I can't believe that if they understood how important the work was, they would understand why we need a career ladder. So they did arrange the meeting. There were 5 union representatives, including the president. I think it was 1199. And I explained what we were doing and why we were doing it. And they were on board from the get-go. They were totally on board. They felt it would really be an improvement for their people, that they would be able to get promoted based upon, what they did in the department, and they met certain goals. And it was a lot easier than they thought it would happen. Now, conversely, about 10 years later, when the surgery centers really exploded around us, we lost 18 people in our system in 1 year to the surgery centers. And I actually did a study. I published it twice, 1 and 10 years later, on the cost to train essential service worker. And on the basis of that data, I did a white paper for administration. And I showed them, and I'm talking about at that time we had 12 hospitals. I showed that we were the cost to us to replace those people was $500,000. I think it was $561,000. And yet, if we raised the salaries and in the career ladder to those people, we would actually save $100,000 a year. And I had to go before the board of trustees of our entire system. If you want to talk about being intimidating, you go into this big room that you don't even know exists, and you sit around this table with 20 people. And I didn't know the result until the next day. My boss called me. He said, I don't know what you said, but you got it. So we got the salary increases. You know, some people in the southern part of our state, their salary was almost doubled because they were paid that much less because they were in a very rural area. So
Wow.
it was a big win for us. But you got to do your homework. There's data out there, not only to train your people, but you want to keep them because, you know, for 50 cents an hour, people will leave because they need that extra money.
Yeah.
So career ladders are so important, not only to make sure that you're, you know, keeping your people there, but also to make sure that you're not losing money in your system.
You've just shown the important, before we get to either Don and Tony about that, you have showed the importance of doing your research and having real data.
Oh, yeah.
Instead of, oh, we need to get more money and I've got 5 certifications and whatever. It is taking the emotional part out of it and say, here is what's going to happen. If you do this, we can save you money and keep it more, have more quality people, or to go from there. Don, I know you had a similar circumstance in building a career ladder. Could you share some of that with us real quick in a minute or two?
Sure. The first one came when they knew that I was in a hospital which had a union. That was a city hospital. We had 12 city hospitals in New York City. And of course, the union right away was concerned because the reading level of the people working in sterile processing was at the 3rd or 4th grade level. And they feared that these people would lose their jobs with mandatory certification with not being able to understand the test. So the union actually brought in instructors, and we had classes for them in all the hospitals to prepare people in sterile processing to read and vocabulary and everything. And we concentrated on, you know, questions that would arise in the test for the certification. So that was my experience in trying to develop, and we did develop a career ladder program. It was, you know, a tech level in the city hospitals. When I went to hospital for special surgery, I did not have the union problem, but I wanted to raise the salaries because I wanted to get the best people working in my hospital. And so I made sure that not only was it required to be certified, but I also had the number of certifications you had, you would get a $500 increase for each certification. And you couldn't be in a leadership, either a lead tech or supervisor, unless you had the leadership certification. So I did the career ladder program. It was very successful in hospital for special surgery.
Wow, that is in Tony, I'm going to use this and bring a question to you for a second. Then I'd like Adam and Kevin to think about it. So we got these people certification and they know book stuff. But what I hear a lot is critical thinking. Sure, they know it should be this temperature and that, but the skill of critical thinking of what's there. I know Kevin and Nancy are both nurses, and they've learned through their nursing what I call a PI, assess, plan, implement, explain when it comes to the patient. But that's the same thing our technicians have to do, is assess the problem, take that knowledge, explain it, and do it. We've talked, you and I, privately about the training and getting people to think. What advice do you want to give to the people who are listening? How do we help people take that knowledge and critically think? Is it having different instructors or what is it, Tony? What are your thoughts?
Oh, that's a good question. I think the most important thing is that we have good educational programs. Part of the certification program is to teach them how to critically think. And that boils down to the instructors. And they're there to teach them that concept. So you need some control over the instructors. That's my take on it.
Okay. Kevin, Adam, what are your thoughts real quick on how do you guys go into departments and we see people who are certified, but they can't critically think to solve a problem. How do we, certification is that part, but how do we go to that step? What are your thoughts?
I mean, I would say that it helps to be intentional about developing that in people. Like, I think a lot of us are guilty of this in multiple roles in our lives. Like, we all wear multiple hats. Some of us are parents, some of us, do other things. Some of us are leaders in the department. And sometimes what we'd like to do is do something and then everyone just does it, right? That's what people want from their staff, generally speaking. But that is not ideal, right? You send people to school to learn. And in this case, it would be go get your book, study, become certified. That should be the very beginning of the learning process. Once you get out there onto the floor, then the stuff that you've learned in the book or in school or wherever you got your education should start to kind of like collide with what people are teaching you and showing you to do in the department. And instead of being told like, well, this is the way we do it here, and this is the way we're going to expect you to do it, there should be a method and built-in ways for people to speak up, ask questions, be inquisitive, learn from other people. There's people that come in and they service the machines. They're from either OEMs or they're from clinical engineering. Shoot, they're going to go and service your machines. Why not send a tech over there to sit there and watch and ask questions and be inquisitive and, do that? Like, make sure that people have the opportunity and are encouraged to take what they have learned from the books and then explore it in the real world in curious ways, and really that's, I think, how you develop critical thinking skills. Most of us want to shut that down. We say we want critical thinkers, but then when they start to do some critical thinking, we're like, no, you're making this too hard for me. Let's just do as I say. Okay. In this case, and that's where we have to kind of look in the mirror a little bit and not be duplicitous and start, really fostering that, whether you are an educator, a leader, or even a frontline technician that's been around for 20, 30 years. I'm sorry, but if you've been around 20 or 30 years, you should be a leader almost by default, whether you want to or not. You are a resource person, or you should be. And if you're not, we got some questions to ask of you, right? But that, in my opinion, is one of the biggest ways to foster critical thinking. You have to be intentional about it, and you have to welcome it, and you have to welcome challenging opinions and opposing ideas. Not necessarily to a disruptive extent, but a healthy dialogue and putting pieces of the puzzle together, because these instruments continue to get complex. The surgeries get more complex. It's all getting more challenging, not less challenging. So that's the only way forward, I think.
Nancy, or did you want to say?
I just would like to say one thing, Adam. You're correct, but it starts with leadership. That's where it starts. They got to create that environment within the department.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And developing leadership is a whole nother skill set. It's something that you continuously learn. You don't necessarily start off. People think you're a born leader or not a born leader, and so you are or you aren't. None of that is true. You have to develop it, and you have to start somewhere. And so when you first started as a leader, you have to assume I'm no good at this, but my intention is to be world class at this at some point down the line. And so I have to start somewhere, and it's the same way with the techs, and you have to foster that. So yes, Tony, I agree with you. Leadership is almost everything in an SPD, in any department within the hospital. I mean, we took the same sterile processing techs that were struggling, and we were canceling cases and having nothing but trouble, and took the exact same technicians and turned the entire department around, and actually ended up winning an award and all of this for quality and all of it all comes down to leadership.
Mm. Nancy, you were going to say something? Go ahead.
The biggest obstacle to critical thinking is to understand the why. They know what they have to do, but nobody takes the time to explain why. I will see people get policies, they'll buy them online, and I know I'm going to tick off a lot of people, but that's your job. Get those policies and review them with the staff. Don't just put them in a book and expect them to know what to do. And when you go through and read them, explain why you have to put the test pack in that location. What happens when you don't do it? Nobody does this. And when you give that information to people, it's like a flower that's blooming. They go, oh my gosh, now I understand. Nobody ever told them. You do a Bowie Dick test. They don't go any further than that. So this is what the critical point that's missing. And I find it so deplorable today, considering all of the patient safety initiatives that are out there. And yet this is like the forgotten area. There should be auditing every single year of a sterile processing department so that by an outside person who can tell what's going on. It's better to find out that way because people themselves are not doing it. Maybe some are, but not from what I've seen. The things that we find in departments that people don't know. We still have people don't even know what the AMI standards are.
Yeah, it's true.
And if they have them, it's sitting on a shelf and nobody does anything with them. So it's very frustrating because we've worked so hard over the years to get sterile processing elevated. And to your point, Kevin, when we did certification, we found the average reading level was 5th to 8th grade for sterile processing. And so that's another problem because a lot of the materials are written on a collegiate level. And so they don't even understand them. So you have to, as an educator, be able to get that information like the AMI standards and drop it down so that they understand it. But that takes work, and a lot of people, unfortunately, don't put that work in. As a matter of fact, most people just farm it out to other people. They don't do the education. I have been in departments where they hand them an article from a magazine that has CEs and say, okay, read it. When you're done, I'll give you the certificate. I mean, I just don't understand how somebody could learn something without having that interaction. And that goes to what Tony said. The manager's responsibility is to provide education and knowledge and training for their staff, and I don't see it being done.
I'd like to say that the demise of so many of the local associations has hurt the development of leaders in our field. It's like they're out for themselves in each individual hospital. Mm-hmm. I always found that there was when there were meetings where people got together and were taught at the different meetings where we had vendors and we had talks on different topics, that people came back with inspiration to their hospitals. We don't see that anymore. And I know from going into the hospital, I work for HealthMark and trying to do an in-service education, the directors would say, you have 15 or 20 minutes. That's your time limit. We can't afford to have people not working on their trays. It comes down to, I believe, developing leaders and people in the hospitals that can still develop our profession through our local associations, but they're disappearing left and right. And that's a serious thing.
Adam, you got anything you want to add real quick? And I know there's other questions, but I want to throw one out real quick after this. You got anything to add to this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think what Nancy said is exactly right. It's all about the why. And the way we train people in sterile processing, and I've given a talk on this before, is the same way they do in fast food. They show them this is the way you do it. Then that person mimics the behavior, and then we sign them off. Oh, they know how to do that behavior. But if they don't understand the reason they're doing it, when it comes to be crunch time and they have to make a quick decision on doing it right, they're going to skip the step because they don't understand why it's so important to do every single step in an IFU or to follow the standards exactly. So, I mean, to me, when we talk about training and things like that, it again, it goes to culture and leadership, that they have to know the why first before they learn the skills. And then the skills will stick because, again, they know how important it is to do it.
I think this this is a pet peeve I'm going to bring up since I have some really good people here. I know we all want certification, but I have a very big issue with what and how we're looked at by our Bureau of Labor Statistics. We are number 13.9093.00. Our profession is called medical equipment preparers. That's what we're called by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And it says, we prepare, sterilize, install, or clean laboratory healthcare equipment, may perform routine laboratory tasks, and operate to inspect equipment. And then they give all these examples of, we could be CS techs and so on. As we talk about certification, we don't even have a name that represents what we do. How do we go about changing that as we try to get people to be certified? Because our HR departments look under this name and not what we call, or am I off the tracks here? Do we need to change our name or just live with that? We're really medical equipment preparers.
I think you're right. And I think we should go to the Department of Labor. Hell, I provided a lot of data to them. They've said stuff to me many times that they wanted information on ethylene oxide and some other stuff. I'm a firm believer, that if you want something done, you got to be proactive and do it. So let's get a hold of the Department of Labor. I don't know if they're interested. They're so busy with other stuff right now, but it's worth a shot.
Yeah.
I think that, this is a science and we don't treat it like that, but it really is. And, in Europe where they call it the sterilization sciences, that's what we really should be focusing on. I mean, another profession that I sort of equated to is like a laboratory technician, right? They need to know how to handle blood. They need to do testing on different things, just like we do. They make sure their equipment is working the way it should. And yet, when you look at that department, right, it's a very different vibe. They're scientists almost, right? The laboratory technicians. We're like grunt workers. And it's the way that we're viewed inside the hospital system that I think is flawed, that they really don't understand all of the, like when I started as a manager, one of the things that I had to learn about was water quality. I knew some about water quality, but once I was a manager and had to fix why I'm getting wet loads, what's going on inside my sterilizer, why we're getting washer failures and things like that, I got a crash course in deep diving into water. And I think that's one of those things that's like, it's a science. And there's a lot of things that we need to think about as leaders going into this. And again, that goes to beyond certification, right? There's so much more that we can learn about.
I started out as a respiratory therapist in the healthcare field many years ago. And the difference between respiratory therapy and sterile processing, and they both are very technical in nature, and life and death, in my opinion, are involved in both professions. One thing that developed in the respiratory therapy profession was associate degree programs, which turned into baccalaureate programs, which turned into master's programs in pulmonary care. You don't see that in sterile processing. A few community college tries to get that going. And really the respect unfortunately, from a lot of people in the healthcare field goes with education and the degree that's associated with it. We never really looked into developing an associate degree program in any of our 2-year colleges. We tried, I know, down here in Long Island, and that fell through. Nursing has gone that route. Respiratory therapy has, physical therapy. We should be also looking at that, but we failed to do that over the years. And we actually shot ourselves in the foot by not doing that.
I tried a number of years ago as well. The New Jersey State Department of Education had some funding from the feds to develop health science professionals. And I went to a group of community colleges to see if we could work on this particular issue, and they didn't want to hear it.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I know there's some out there. There's some trade schools in that that are trying to develop, and there are some there. And that's probably another topic. And I don't know how we're getting close on time, but I want to.
I just want to mention one thing.
Go ahead.
A lot of these schools have nurses and surgical techs teaching them.
Mm.
and they're not teaching them the right stuff.
Yeah,
I
that's
just-
true.
I tell you, we had people come in from a school. These kids were paid $19,000 to go to this course, and they didn't even know what a Bowie Dick test was. I kid you not.
Well,
So, that's not always the answer. You got to look at who's providing the education.
that's true. Who is teaching? Well, I've heard some classes have people with less than 1 year experience teaching sterile processing class. And I'm not saying they're not good teachers, but I'm going, I learn everything every day. And Nancy, you know this. I email you. I'm stumped a lot, and I'm emailing people and asking, I need help, for God's sakes. That's a great point. I want to bring something up. And Tony, I hope you don't dig me too hard. And this is 2019. Tony, myself, and Richard Schul were sitting at a New Jersey meeting, sitting in an Irish pub. And we said, how can we make mandatory certification? And we said, maybe we need to go to CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and tell them that they need to put a line in their standards that anybody doing this type of job requires certification from however they, either organization. And then the pandemic hit, and Tony would email me, Steve, what you doing? What you doing? Do you think this might be the route for our organizations to get together and say, heck with all this state stuff? There's a group that says, if you want to get paid, you need to have these people certified. So let's talk about that as we start to wrap it up. Do you think that's a viable route for us to go? And Tony, I'm going to have you start it off.
It's possible. It's going to be a hard road to take. If you take a look at the CMS standards now, they're very broad-based. We call them catch-all statements, in which they have broad statements, and you can enforce anything you want on them. They don't get into the nitty-gritty of sterilization or infection control. They just have broad statements, and they have to go through the same regulatory rigmarole that I would have to go through. And they would have the same challenges that we have. And there's politics does come in the federal level. It comes obvious than it does on the state level.
And do they have the authority, though, to require that?
I don't think they do, to be honest.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just like Amy isn't regulatory. They could recommend it, but they're not regulatory. And that's how a lot of these facilities get away with it.
No, Nance, they are regulatory in that they give money to the states to do what they call federal cert inspections.
Oh, you're talking about medicine?
I've done many federal cert inspections, and they're like a day off for me, because they're so broad-based in their standards. They're not like state standards or national guidelines.
Right.
Okay. I was just wondering if, we've talked a lot about certification, things we need to do from training and critical thinking. And I thought maybe going the CMS route might be the way to go. But right now it doesn't sound like it. And Tony, you have more experience being an inspector and having to follow some of those rules and guidelines.
Steve, I told you I would be more than willing to go to Washington with you.
I know.
And do an attempt.
Well,
right?
We still might get that going now. Give it back to Kevin and Adam, because Adam's watching the time. Where are we at for any more questions, Adam, for the second part? Or Kevin, we need to start wrapping it up or what?
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's a natural transition, Adam, if you agree, just to get to the where do we go from here? I mean, and you already kind of started that conversation, Steve, by exploring whether or not CMS is, a possible option. I think that's where we're at, right? We're kind of brainstorming possible solutions as, it's been 20 years now, right? Since the first state required certification, and we can't wait another 20 years for another 5 states, right? Like how much is that really moving the needle? And that's assuming that 5 more are added. We don't even know if that's even plausible. one of the things that you've kind of already hinted at here between Don and Nancy and Tony, and something that I've talked about before, but I think it's worth just exploring as a potential possibility. And that's actually maybe taking it a level above in terms of education and preparation, and actually building an associate's degree program and making it an associate's degree occupation. I mean, this is something that has been done, as Don mentioned. Nurses used to be diploma prepared nurses, and then eventually it was associates, and now they're really pushing for bachelors, and they're actually seeing, correlations between medical errors and whether or not a nurse is associates prepared or bachelor's prepared. There's a difference in the number of medical errors, suggesting that a bachelor's degree is probably the better route and more efficacious route to go. So I'm thinking, similarly to the nursing industry, sterile processing has evolved so much. And to Adam's point, in my opinion, it's become more of a science. Why isn't there a associate's degree of applied science in sterilization services, or whatever we want to call it? Maybe that's really the route that we should be going. I don't know how nursing made the jump from diploma to associate's degree and so on. I'm not sure how that happens. Does everyone just one day all agree this is what we need? I don't know how that happens. And maybe Nancy, you can speak to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was in the very first class.
There we go. Perfect.
Of the associate degree program in 1966. And our local community college, they just were so short of nurses and wanted to get more people into the profession in less time, because your diploma schools were all 3 years. And so they wanted to have a program. And incidentally, that was competency based. You didn't have all the experience of a diploma nurse, but you had all the concepts. I can tell you, in the class I was in, we started with 65 people and we only graduated 28. There was that many that dropped out. It was very, very challenging. But those who hung through, I passed my boards on the first time. And incidentally, the New York boards are some of the toughest in the country, which is why a New York license is recognized by reciprocity in almost every state. But that's how it got started. And it was extremely challenging. But that's how it got started. And it was a very good program.
Nancy, you just put the big C word, competency, and we didn't even talk. We've talked around it, but we didn't really say much. But Kevin, that's an interesting concept. And I think there are some schools out there, but this is the science of reprocessing. That's what we're talking about, or the science of sterilization. I think it's about at that time, unless Tony or Don want to say anything real quick as we wrap this up, and let
just one last thing.
Sure.
I think Nancy, Adam, and Kevin all made good points about this being a science. Well, who are we dealing with? We're dealing with the OR and we're dealing with APEC, two important groups. How are they driven? They're driven by data.
Yeah.
Do we have the data to support what we're doing? And so what I'm recommending and suggesting is that we need to publish.
Yeah.
We need to sell certification to everybody, because they don't know who we are or what we do.
Yeah.
Yeah. My final point.
It was an article that was someone just sent to me that was published in one of the AORN journals on certification. I had nothing to do with it. I don't know the people who wrote it. I haven't had a chance to go through it, but I did have someone, a colleague of mine from Amy, who said that he felt that there was some errors in the data, but that was the first one that I ever saw on sterile processing. So, Steve, I'll send you a copy. Anybody else who wants a copy, I'll send it to you.
I would like one.
Okay.
Yeah, there's something that was recently published. Corey Offset did something on training, and Kevin or Adam, how do you want to wind this up and go from there? Any suggestions what we might do to help people if they're thinking to get something going in their states?
I think we should have an open forum and invite people to a podcast on certification. About 10 years ago, Amy had a Getting to Zero national conference in Virginia, they had every organization in the country there, from the American Hospital Association, American Nurses, APIC, AORN, Joint Commission, you name it, they were all there. And we looked, they had facilitators, and we went through all of the issues that were preventing us from getting infections down to zero. And of course, we were in the sterile processing group. It was fascinating, the information that came out of that.
I agree with all of you on all the points that you made. Steve, remember I mentioned to you yesterday that we wrote an article 20 years ago together about certification?
It is 20 years.
I'd like to see that article again and look at the points.
I sent it to you.
Oh, I didn't get that yet. I got to look for it. Okay. But I think a lot of the points that we made then are going to be the same today. It hasn't changed that much. But talking about that and having a forum and discussing the importance of certification and the importance of our profession and developing leaders that really care is an important thing to do, Nancy. And I agree with you 100%. And Tony, too.
I think there's 7 states, but I got to recheck that. It is 5?
It's 5.
Yeah.
It is 5 for sure. Okay. Well, Kevin and Adam, well, how do you want to wrap this up here?
Let's just go around and see any final thoughts. So, Tony, any final thoughts you want to leave listeners with?
I think I'm going to pass right now. Go to the other speakers.
Fair enough. We'll move to Nancy. Nancy, any final thoughts you want to give to listeners?
I just want to commend you guys for not only recognizing, New Jersey with the certification, but opening this up, because I think there's a lot of people out there that really do want to do it, but they just don't know how. They don't have the resources. They don't know where to start. They don't have the support. And maybe that's something we can do.
Absolutely. Don, anything you want to add?
I agree that we need to push forward, and the people who started this many years ago hopefully can help to get the new people on board with it. And also our National Association has to take a step forward.
I'll just say one closing comment. We need to get the young technicians and managers active again and participate in this, because I know I don't have the energy anymore.
Yeah. I have to agree. We shouldn't worry about clicks and different things. But I do want to say this. We've just got these 3 people, and I know there have been so many other people active. There have been people who have worked for what they felt was in their state, and they also should be commended. In no way do I want people to feel just because I think New Jersey had a great blueprint. We've heard from Adam and Don and Tony and Nancy. Each state is different. You got to figure it out. And all the states that have certification must be commended, because they figured a way to get it in, to get it working. And we need to figure out, how do we help share what people have learned to do it in their state. So 20 years from now, every state is requiring it. It would be really great. So that was my 2 cents.
All right. Well, thank you, Tony. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Don, for being on the podcast. Thank you, Stephen, for facilitating. And thank you to our host, Kevin Anderson. We hope you guys enjoyed the conversation. There will be more follow-up. Hopefully, we'll have some kind of open discussion where people can ask questions to these guys and learn how they were able to succeed where so many others have failed. So thank you all for being here, and we'll see you on the next podcast.
Thank you.
care.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye, everybody.
All opinions expressed on this show are those of the presenters. Before using any medical device, it is important to review the device manufacturer's instructions for use.